Okay, and so we've got two more items of substance, and this is the first one. And just a reminder that in regards to this is the precursor to a larger piece of work that is going to be coming to us in February, which is about the money. The purpose of this is to get a presentation in regards to the situation we are in with the categorisation process and seeking approval in principle for proposed changes to the North Island Weather Events Auckland Crown funding agreement. So this is about endorsing in principle an approach basically to renegotiate with the government in regards to the money. So there is budget stuff to be discussed in February, and as we are at 3:15, if we start to dive down that, I might just drag us out of that rabbit hole, and because we're going to finish before 4.
I'm happy to move if it speeds things up now.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that, and they've got a seconder. Thank Desley. Okay, right, there we go. We are moving at pace.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman and members. Good to be in front of you today. As the Chairman said, the purpose of today is to present the reviewed forecast of Category 3. Those are the homes that are in tolerable risk to life, and seek approval in principle for the proposed changes to the Crown funding agreement, which in due course will be something for you to discuss as for future budgets. Just to take us, on a bit of a journey again, really just to remind ourselves that on the 2023 weather events for the North Island, 20% of Auckland homes are in flood hazard areas, and our estimates were approximately 12,000 of those homes had floor level flooding of some sort. Really just to provide some context of the 100 urban catchments we have, and really showing the urban area here mostly, 60 of those catchments were impacted during the weather events. The decisions we're seeking today, and there are a number of recommendations, Mr. Chair, also noting, is to endorse the request for the Crown to consider more funding to support the increased forecast without further debt to Auckland Council, or, if that can't be achieved, endorse the request to reallocate up to $200 million of funding to support the buyout program and support retreat rather than resilience, noting that there are some benefits of that, and endorse the Council's share of funding into the 2025 and then 2026 financial years and beyond. And Michael's here to help us with any conversations around that, given your limitations on that. Lastly, second to last, endorse agreeing to additional capital funding for the flood resilience projects from 2027, and again, future decisions. Those are critical things to ensure the resilience for Aucklanders and our infrastructure into the future. And lastly, just to give a bit of a reminder around the land optimisation program that will seek to recover funding that potentially we are confident about funding some of this change. So this slide really just reminds us of where we were at in terms of the Crown funding agreement. You agreed to that on the 6th of October last year, so it's been a relatively short and sharp period, with in noting that in that report we identified risks of the volatility around between Category 2 and Category 3. Mitigation through a risk assessment framework's been undertaken to do the assessment around Category 3 and Category 2 with a quality assurance program with an expert panels and others. Really just the challenges, and I know you're well aware of these, but is moving people from untolerable risk to life within 2 years where possible. That's the real challenge of why we're going in some places to Category 3 rather than Category 2C. The timeframes for delivery of those infrastructure projects in an efficient and effective way is taking longer than that 2-year period. The Crown ministers in particular have a real interest in that residual risk in that period to deliver a resilience project. Then the reforecast numbers of particular interest today. So our planned forecast was 904. That includes the initial forecast of moving 200 2C projects into the 700 we had forecast, or the estimates, right back in August, September last year. And based on the forecast we have is those numbers between 1,205 to 1,264. Our refinement to that is more at the lower end of that range, but we are learning from the volatility that we've got in these situations. To date, we've classified or categorised 2,753 properties. Of those, of 3,520 odd homeowners who have opted into the process. Of particular note is a real surge in opting into the process, particularly of high-risk homes, just over 140 leading up to the 30th of September closure of the scheme, which added to those increasing numbers. Of the Category 3s, as of today, we have 951 homes that have been categorised as Category 3. Just in terms of provision and Crown discussions, provision in the funding agreement allows us to re-enter in good faith with the Crown about additional funding because of the good faith or the estimates that we made in August, September last year in the agreement. The new government has communicated that there's no more additional funding. In other words, working inside the envelope of the funding that was provided for resilience and retreat is the message that we have received. But certainly the funding agreement provides in good faith new funding. So the result of that is what we are suggesting today is both of those options. But Category 2C has proven difficult with the time constraints and priorities set by the Crown and their categorisation framework. So the balance has shifted a bit initially towards retreat, allowing land optimisation, as I said, to partially recover and fund further risk mitigation. So the longer term lead-in time would be more to a resilience program than a retreat program. Just in terms of the numbers, I'll ask Tanya to present these, but if you don't mind, I'm happy to.
No problem, Mace. Okay, so what that means in terms of the Category 3 additional properties that we expect to purchase is that under the current funding agreement, after allowing for committed Category 2C projects and also allowing for the expected costs of the 2P grant scheme, which we've effectively ring-fenced, then there's around about 160 million of council funding that is remaining for Category 2. That isn't sufficient to cover the total additional costs of the Category 3 buyouts that we're expecting to come through the program, which is somewhere between 328 million under Scenario A up to 387.6 million under the worst case scenario. And so that cost is shared 50-50 across the Crown and Council. So what we're proposing is that we move all of the council funding that's remaining in that Category 2 bucket to cover the council share and in addition provide for whatever remaining capital funding is required. And that would be a decision through the annual plan process. But in order to get a decision from the Crown on their side of the agreement, we'd be seeking in principle endorsement from you at this stage. And so that's for capital funding of between 4.7 and 34.9 million under the worst case scenario. There would also be some additional costs that flow through as a result of those purchases that council would have to fund fully. So that relates to the cost of the house removal program, consequential OPEX in particular, but a lot of those would come through at a later date.
So just in terms of benefits and drawbacks for Category 3, the options present. Thank you, Tanya. Delivering on the policy objective to remove people from intolerable risk to life, so that's the overriding objective of the policy that you adopted last year, and some land could be used for future resilience projects and would be required in any case, and as Tanya outlined, requiring between 4.7 and 34 or 35 million additional capital funding. So the options you have cost avoidance of not proceeding, won't be able to buy all the Category 3 properties, people will be left in situations of intolerable risk to life, and that reputational risk and damage. For the Category 2 program, Tanya, do you want to go through this or share this?
We'll flip through one more slide.
Sorry.
Okay. So the second part to the additional funding is the Category 2 program. So under the current funding agreement, the costs are shared 62%, 38% across the Crown and the Council. And so after moving funding for the Crown side of the equation up to Category 3 to cover their share of the costs, the Crown still has effectively money left in the bucket. So that's great. There's money that we can access, but the problem is the matching arrangement. So in order to access that funding, the council would need to commit to providing additional capital funding to get that remaining Crown funding possible for the risk mitigation projects. So based on the current scenarios, the amount that we are talking about would be between 40.8 million and 59.4 million. But that would be a decision that we would make through the next annual plan round, so it would be for FY27. And our view is by that stage we will have much better information about the severely affected land program and the revenue that could be generated through the sale of Category 3 land. So the additional costs for the risk mitigation program could be offset through reprioritisation and or revenue that we gain through the land sale program.
And just to round that off, really in terms of the Māngere projects, so Te Arata and Haranea, the schedule is for those to break ground in March. So consents have been accepted. We haven't received the resource consents yet, but and the final detailed design work is being worked through for final price. So that's included and banked already, that funding. Any upside on that in terms of doing that for less than 53 million will be would flow back into this funding to offset it. So just the implications for risk mitigation programs. Tanya's outlined the cost sharing arrangement, but they are subject to Crown approval, so feasibility is a key part of that, and timing has been a key part, as we've said. Work progressing in 2027 in the highest priority areas. Those areas at present are in the Wairau Valley and in Swanson, Henderson, Ranui area. But Tanya has noted already the impact on future LTP years and the opportunity of looking at land optimisation. We are bringing a paper to you in February to really outline that approach around optimisation of land and how it could potentially fund certainly the shortfall that would be there to deliver that program. Just in terms of not proceeding with the additional funding, yes, there would be cost avoidance, but loss of access to 62% share funding for resilience projects for capital infrastructure, and then the community expectations that have been met. There would be some risk there from a trust and confidence point of view. In terms of our recommendations, we are suggesting seeking the additional Crown funding for Category 3, so that is additional funding, or if that's not successful, requesting the Crown to reallocate within the broad envelope of resilience and the retreat or Category 2, Category 3 funding envelopes to Category 3, and then reallocate council funding from Category 2 to Category 3 in FY25 and FY26. So essentially bringing forward that funding to a degree, and consider the annual plan funding to meet Category 3 of that's between 4.7 million of capital and 35 million, plus the unavoidable costs for consequential OPEX. In terms of the risk mitigation projects, so these are the flood resilience projects that Healthy Waters and Flood Resilience have been working really hard on. Agree in principle to make those additional capital funding commitments so that we can access that Crown funding, so leaving none of that Crown funding on the table. That's probably one of the most important points we can make. And reducing the scope of some of the co-funded Category 2 risk mitigation program, or pushing that out in our infrastructure planning. A recommendation around staff looking at those revenue opportunities you've already around optimisation of land, and you've provided that direction in the past, and we've been working at that diligently, I would say. And the final proposal to the Crown is for the Crown, if you agree, is to delegate the responsibility to the Chief Executive and the Storm Recovery Political Advisory Group due to the time constraints. So, Mr. Chairman, lastly, just next steps, just to reiterate, final forecasts will be available in early 2025 to firm up those range of numbers. Requests to the Crown are critical in early 2025 before, so that we get that locked in and committed funding. And then reports to your committee, Mr. Chairman, in February 2025 on the rescoped Blue-Green Network program and house deconstruction and site management, so cost control. There's been a lot of work done on that. Approximately a third of the homes now are being relocated rather than deconstructed or demolished. And look, bringing to you the first tranche of the severely affected land policy program that would allow optimisation of land and recovery of some of the funding. The other work streams that continue to occur, of course, Councillor Hill's committee around natural hazards plan change, future focused. We are also wanting a report back from the Crown on the National Climate Adaptation Framework, which they were committed to in the funding agreement, and contributing to the national knowledge around the framework for climate adaptation and where we find ourselves after the 2023 event. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
Thank you, Mason Tanya. Someone like to move? Thank you, Desley. Sorry?
I'll move it so I can adjust it.
I'm just looking up there. Oh, it's already been moved. Hang on. Oh, it was too. Goodness me. I'm way ahead of myself. Righty-ho. So questions. Mayor?
Right, well, I've got a few. I mean, you've got us into a woot pull-up situation here. And if you could get back to slide 5, which is one of the green and blue horizontal diagrams. That one there. The reality is you should have started with the first one, which is 700, because you've glibly moved to 900, but we made our decisions when it was 700. And if you look at that up there, all the mistakes have been at the most expensive end of the bloody thing. The other bits don't cost so much each are all right. But the Category 3s, which have gone out at an average $1 million now, because stupidly we didn't take your advice to put a cap on it. But it's almost doubled. And the request is just stop doing good stuff for the future and ask for more. I mean, I want to know a few things here. How many actions have we taken against people involved in poor design or poor building? So if someone's just got a retaining wall that fell over that was designed by one of the big companies, are we just paying up for that? I want to see some action here. I'm not just going to put my hand out to the minister because he's got no more money either. And so where somebody's done something dumb, I can't believe that 1,264 houses have failed and it's been no contributing factors from some poor construction or some, we've already seen that with the ones about the driveways. Most of them are dreadful. Didn't have a retaining wall, now they want a free retaining wall. Are we taking action? Or I suspect the answer is zero.
So,
In which case I'll be
Chairman,
very upset.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, the scheme is a no-fault scheme, but in terms of any remediation, that's critical to ensure that it's properly designed in the future. I think that's a critical point.
Well, if someone's been put into intolerable risk to life by somebody else's actions, I don't see why the ratepayers have to pay for that. So I'm going to add in here that you go back and review the lot for any possible, because I've visited a lot of them, retaining walls that fell over that someone was paid to design or put in. So how many actions are you going to take with that? Next one. Can we have, I'm wanting to have an independent review of intolerable risk to life. Those words could mean anything. I mean, anyone living above the height of a fire ladder is taking an intolerable risk to life in Auckland, but we're not going to build their houses, buy them off them when there's a fire. So can we have an independent review of intolerable risk to life? It could mean anything. And these are big files of money. So I want some questions on that.
Certainly.
We've got a money-back sales program. I want to hear some numbers about that. Not just putting a hand out for more. You mentioned reputational damage. There's no two ways about it. You guys have suffered some. So we need, on February we're going to have some new figures. I want to know how much we can put aside for recovery of land and how much realistically we can do that. If it's nothing, we've got to know that now, and I'll be horrified. Give me the land and I'll make some money out of it.
Mr Mayor, we do have some, we don't want to give you numbers today, but certainly significant optimisation recovery of land is available to you.
Well, let's have some numbers on that and some pretty, I want to have...
I think your other question about failure of structures, so the Natural Hazards Commission or EQC, typically where land's failed, and insurance, we've recovered from the homes that we purchased so far, 400 of the 461 I have data for in front of me, 90 million, so around 13% currently.
Well, that'd be interesting to have that as well. I mean, this warrants a very close look. This is probably the biggest threat we've got to an LTP. And your solution is to not do good stuff for the future and go and ask for more. I think I want to have, how do we get the cost down? This is whoop pull up right now. This is our biggest risk. So how do you get the cost down? How do we maximise the money back sales program? I want an independent review of intolerable risk to life. That could mean anything. And because you guys went out and proselytised and hunted for more people at the end, suddenly they're facing as an intolerable risk to their finances, suddenly became an intolerable risk to our life, and an intolerable risk to our finances is to our ratepayers. And most of them didn't build on cliffs or build in shitty houses either. So I'm sounding a bit hard now, but
Oh, not at all, Your
Eh?
Worship. Not at all, Your Worship, but we can certainly get a review done. But so PwC have done a review of our process in terms of using the New Zealand standards and the frameworks, both for land stability or instability and for
I
flooding.
think for your own risk, we
So-
need to have an independent review of intolerable risk to life and how it's been interpreted.
Take that on.
I would like to add a couple of things. As well as all those things you've got here, which is basically handouts and things, I think we should ask you to take all steps to reduce costs. We should get an independent review of intolerable risk to life. We should have, number 3 is maximise returns from land. And number 4, chase contributors to damage. In other words, if somebody's designed something that's failed, if someone's put a pipe in there that's caused it, let's have a crack at these people. Or are we prevented to by the insurance returns? And how much did we get from insurance? Because we've got ourselves in this because we relied on a thing when it started at 700, and all the mistakes are in green. So I want those added in, and if so, and I'm sure there'll be a seconder for those. There's one sitting over there.
So just, Barry's got something to say in terms of an audit.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to address a couple of those, Mayor. The first one is that we're in the process of getting an independent expert to do a audit review of things around the work around catchment modelling, the assumptions that have gone into that, and the actual modelling itself. So that's something others are starting. We've talked about it ourselves, and that's will be awarded, I'm hoping, before Christmas.
Good.
That's relating to the flood modelling. With regard to the actual assessments of around categorisation, we are doing a review right now to ensure that the quality processes, quality assurance processes around that categorisation are appropriate. So those are two things that are happening right now that were started recently as these numbers have come through.
Well, that's right. I'm not picking on staff. I'm just trying to make sure we take correct steps and understand this is serious. So I want to maximise the returns from the land, and you might need some help for that. And I still want to chase contributors unless we're prevented from that. So I want those 4 things to be steps added to these, as well as putting a hand out, if that's all right.
Chair, as the mover, and I'm sure the Deputy Mayor is the seconder, could some wordsmithing
I've got
just
them written
take
here.
place? I know that Barry is working on it. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So hang on. So we're just going to keep with what we've got, and we're not dancing around the place. So, but I guess part of that would be analysing our culpability in regards to, as we chase people, of what our culpability is in terms of consenting and prior consenting, I would imagine, and what that would mean for us if we suddenly instigated a whole heap of stuff and then found that we'd be contributing, I would imagine, to the whole issue and having to cough up some more money, a bit like Ken pulling the top off a motor when there's an oil leak and finding out the head's cracked. So I think it's a dangerous road we start to go down, but people can vote on that. But if an amendment's coming. So Shane, you've got a question?
I do. I might need a second effort if I can see the words, because I might have questions on that, but I'm not sure yet. But just go with my original questions for now. What would passing this resolution mean for Clover Drive? Because I know we're discussing this stuff in Feb, but I just need to be confident that I'm not accidentally delaying that project through voting for this today.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. No, there's still forward progress on Clover Drive as a priority.
And we're not expecting it to be delayed?
No, it would start in 2027 under the scenario, with the detailed design work to be done in that interim period, so we're not stopping on any of that detailed design work.
Okay, kapai. And my other cue for now is you got on the slide the offsetting costs through reprioritisation or land use decisions. Could I just get you to provide an example of those where we might be able to recover some costs through those means?
Yeah, a range of opportunities. So there may be adjacent land to another property where there's a non-residential use through an EOI process or an expression of interest process with neighbours to build a garage on, for example, or a tennis court perhaps. But the other option is where what we are seeing now is clusters of properties through a different development form and redevelopment. It is possible that, or probable in some locations, to redevelop that site for residential use with the proper design and mitigations put in place.
Just to follow up on that, Chair, are you working with local boards? Because if we've got a situation, for example, where there's a lot more parkland coming online through demolitions, I mean, are there land swap potentials there, those kind of things? Because we don't want to reduce significantly the amount of homes available in a community.
I think that's, one of the principles is about where you've got places like walkable catchments, that keeping communities in those areas is really critical. And communities are telling us they don't want their communities to become have a lot of vacant land in them and using them. So that's a focus. Working with local boards as well, where there is service provision need for open space and other uses, and where land swaps can occur. That's an active part of that policy that'll be coming to you in February.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
We should have known that already. We've been out for months.
Sorry, Ken.
Thank you. Can we go back to the map slide with the little dots all over it? Thanks. So, the people before you, their problem was all in the area that's got no dots. Up there in the Waitakeries, they pointed out all the slips, etc. You've got flooding there. My point is, where are we going to retreat to? So I go back to the green slides. The Mayor says the problems are all in the green. I think the problems all came from the blue and have been put in the green as the easy way out. Because our intolerable risk seems to be to liability. And this is ending up in a question. I just try to get there quick. If we're going to recover money from the properties and all this sort of stuff, then obviously we're going to use them again. Obviously we can engineer out. The private sector, and I had this discussion at lunchtime with the Mayor, the private sector can get a lot of this engineering done for a third of the price. So we end up getting ourselves trapped in a discussion, and I wonder if the staff are caught between cost, liability, our own technology and all this planning and modelling, and then in the end we put it all in the buyout bucket because that's the only place it sits. How has it gone from 700 to 1200 without, there must be a driver for that.
Well, I think, thank you. So in terms of asking your, just to comment on one of the points you made, Councillor Turner, certainly we're not envisaging that the council would do the redevelopment. It would be about commercial opportunities with the private sector to actually do that development where it could safely be done under certain conditions. Apologies. Your other question about where did those additional properties come from? So 200 were changed middle of the year from Category 2C due to the timeframes of delivering the flood resilience program couldn't be delivered in the timeframes that the Crown wanted and were seeking, and the residual risk was too great, and there would have been liability of leaving people in those homes for too long. They would have repaired a lot more of the homes, and the recovery from insurance proceeds would have been a lot less, and we would have still had that problem to deal with. In many of those cases, we would have needed some of those properties to deliver the resilience program as well, and making daylighting streams, creating larger areas for water to flow during extreme events. The other one was we took direction from around looking at an outreach program to at the end of for the closure of the program to make sure that people weren't left behind. There was confidence in the scheme from Aucklanders, which was part of the objective. And more people opted in, so we had a surge from our original forecasts of over 500 more homeowners opted into the scheme. And we are assessing that in, I would say, in an objective way under a framework that does have a quality assurance program around it. But it's people opting into the scheme, and our projections, model projections on the number of category 1s or tolerable risk, and category 2 and category 3s, which are intolerable risk. At the beginning of the scheme, there were a lot more category 2s, so it wasn't merely 700. There were those category 2s, which are intolerable risk as well. So there has been some swapping between the colours. I take the point that the Mayor's making on that.
Thank you. So who, council is involved in the quoting or pricing of the engineering intervention, correct? Because if I understood other discussions properly, like there's a dollar value, if all of a sudden the engineering interventions get too high in cost, it flips it into another position. I go back to my comments where, why does council need to be doing that? I do have some people I can name you who wanted to stay, but now say, I've been negotiated out of this because I'm not allowed to do it the way I want.
I think you're referring to the 25% threshold for a Category 2P project. So each of the properties is assessed, and if they breach the threshold of intolerable risk to life, then the next question is there a risk mitigation that is available to mitigate the risk down to a tolerable level? And the policy settings that were agreed by the governing body was that we had to set a cost threshold for what was reasonable for a homeowner to be a 2P, and that was set at 25% of the CV for the property. So the way that the scheme was set up is if the mitigation was 25% or under, it was categorised as 2P to go through a process to assess the feasibility and progress through the grant scheme. If it was over 25%, the homeowner still has an option to contribute. So council would fund up to 25% of the CV, and then the homeowner could contribute the rest if they were happy to do that. If they weren't, the property becomes Category 3. And that was just the policy settings that were agreed at the time.
I think one thing I'd add, Councillor Turner, thanks Tanya, is that we do have people who are quality surveying the quotes that come from homeowners, and often those can be inflated, and getting those down to a reasonable level so projects can be delivered at a reasonable level.
Okay, thank you. I didn't expect your last comment. I understand. I was, of course, looking at it the other way around. I just worry that we're pricing ourselves into this corner. And if, especially when this land is intolerable risk to life, but we're talking about getting returns on it and selling it, there's a gap there in the middle where we could stay where we are with what we've got and affect the outcome. Cheaper, maybe. Thank you. I'll leave.
That's okay.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks. So are we in a situation where at the moment we have people who we're not able to confirm their category, where they're 2P, 3 borderline, because we don't necessarily have enough money to make them a 3 offer? Do we have any people sitting on that borderline?
No, we're in good faith. We're continuing with that categorisation scheme, and the Crown has indicated.
Sorry, can you put the mic
Crown
up
has
closer?
indicated they're comfortable with that approach as well.
Okay. And so if we did get to a situation where, if we don't proceed with the recommendations, then there will be some Category 3s where we will be unable to make offers. How will we choose which ones?
We haven't contemplated that, Councillor Ferry.
Okay. Because I think that's going to be pretty important if people are seriously thinking about giving people category 3s but not making them an offer, then how we as councillors set up a criteria for that is fair and robust, especially when we are partway through a process where we've already made hundreds of category 3 offers, that will be difficult to pull back from. That one I've asked. Do we have any indication yet of what are likely responses from the Crown? I completely support that we should do both the things. First ask them for the money and then second say, okay, if you don't, then we've got a second option. But have we had any indication yet?
The indication from the Crown is that they prefer moving money between Category 2 and Category 3, achieving the same outcome, recognising that both those categories are in the intolerable risk to life in terms of the government categorisation framework.
Okay. Like my colleague to the west and the left here, I'm a bit worried about those future project timelines too. Obviously, he's asked about a specific one. There's a number in my ward. I don't really want to get into a situation where it's just the ones where, you know, we ask about that end up proceeding on the original timeline. So I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but and I think we get that in February, the new timelines. My understanding is that there's some timeline creep anyway, regardless of funding, because you know, some of the stuff is just more complex as we get into it. So yeah, I guess the question there would be around how much of shifting these project timelines is just going to be unavoidable as opposed to is going to be driven by potentially less money, and can we articulate a difference between those two factors?
We can, recognising that the timelines for many of those resilience projects were out between year 5 and year 10 of the LTP.
Yep.
In any case, so you have an opportunity to review that when you plead a new LTP. And depending on land optimisation, how you might be able to co-fund that through a different process.
And so quite a lot of those had, sorry, I'm just finding my timelines here, or quite a lot of them were looking at delivery completed mid-2034, for example, and they had often quite long design and consenting periods. So are we saying that they're going to go out even further than that potentially?
I can't tell you that at the moment, but what I can say is some of the movement is into the category 3 here is looking at the properties that would have a residual risk to life. So the direction from the ministers in particular is to remove that residual risk much more quickly than 10 years. So that's added into that shift from category 3 to category 2. And there are some challenges around some of the business cases in terms of a direct relationship of a return on investment because of the number of properties. There are other co-benefits which we have now talked the Crown into recognising, but further work needs to be done.
So if we end up in sort of getting a bit ahead of myself here, but noting we've got the future land use stuff coming to us next year, if we end up in a situation where because of this we are having to extend some of those, or partly because of this, we have to extend some of those project timelines, but then when we do the future land use work and we find that as we work through these pieces of land over the next 10 to 15 years, because it's going to take that length of time, we are getting more money coming back in from being able to repurpose some portions of land, will we potentially have the capacity to accelerate some of that work? Sorry, it's a little bit of a hypothetical question.
Those will be options and choices for you in considering an LTP, and we'd particularly through Michael's team give you some options around that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would be key parts of the next long-term plan. And, you know, prioritisation decisions made as part of that.
Cool, okay, and obviously local boards will have a role there too, because in a lot of cases this land will sit with them. Okay, and then my final question, thanks for your indulgence, Chair, is just around the rate of acceptance of offers. Are we getting a lot of people turning them down? Do we have any stats on that? Because obviously that has a bearing in terms of the envelope we need. And I guess in some cases people might turn them down because they just never want to sell that piece of land. And in other cases they might turn it down because they don't feel it's enough. And those are two quite different reasons where more money might make a difference for one group but wouldn't for another.
We haven't had a huge number of offers turned down, councillor. There has been a number of valuation disputes over time. Not many of those have gone to a formal valuation, third-party valuation, very less than 5, but a number have where the valuers have come together and had a debate. As I said, we have had a number of disputes where people are seeking a financial hardship, and of course that's excluded from the scheme. And that's a significant contributor. I'm just trying to see the number.
You can tell me later.
In terms of landowner contribution, so far of the 461 properties at the end of October, I'm sorry I don't have the November numbers with me, 34 million's been recovered as part of the landowner contribution, that 5% or 20% for uninsured properties.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to move that dreaded extension of time. We did start late. Someone like to move? Thanks, Richard. Second. Thanks, Christine. Those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Right, Desley, next up.
Thanks, Andy. Look, I don't want to go backwards, but I think because it's been brought up, I'm going to ask the question. There's quite a difference between 700 or 900 and 1200. And I think Aucklanders, certainly the Mayor and some councillors, have quite rightly queried that. Can you just confirm then what uncertainties were we dealing with at the time? What assumptions did we have to make? And how have things changed now? Including the fact that we were dealing with a government that was coming up to an election. Could you just give us that context?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There were a number of assumptions and time constraints on making those estimates for both the geotechnical risk and the flood risk. So there were some volatility in those numbers, and we understood that might increase. Hence, the condition in the agreement allowed to go back and seek renegotiation in good faith. As I said, there's a reasonable number of properties across Auckland, 80,000 that are in floodplains, residential properties. Of those, 20% are in higher risk zones of floodplains, and we knew that in the order of 12,000 properties received habitable floor level flooding. So there are, in terms of we are really focused on the most critical properties is our focus in terms of that intolerable risk to life. The shift also has come from shifting properties that we knew about in terms of the 2C properties in particular, shifting into category 3 because of the time constraints and the moral jeopardy and risk of people continuing to live in those homes. So those are key contributors. I think it's unanticipated, although not totally unanticipated, contributor has been insurance retreat. Certainly insurance retreat and then the consequential lending retreat has concerned many homeowners in those locations and caused them to make decisions that they may have otherwise been willing to take a much higher risk in those locations. But certainly that's a factor, and in fact that's an underlying strategy for the implementation of this scheme on a no-fault basis to retain an insurance market and across the city and across New Zealand. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and the government was asking us to make a call, wasn't it? They wanted to lock it in before the election. Yeah. My second question is, what do we know about other regions? Because, if you're going to get criticised by getting it wrong yourself, you need to see how you fit in the puzzle with everybody else. Did they get their estimates right, or is it not a fair comparison because of the complexity? We've always said Auckland is different from the Hawke's Bay, for example, in other areas, but do you know anything about that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I do. The schemes are different. So Hawke's Bay produced a scheme where they mapped out an area and if made that a Category 3 area and people had to opt in, if you like, to opt out. So they had to argue that they were in a safe location. So quite a different scale of the number of properties. The exception would be Wairoa, where they haven't yet got a feasible scheme to protect over 600 properties in Wairoa, a very difficult situation for them. So the scale is quite different in terms of the number of properties in those locations. The diversity of the topography and the number of from a large fluvial floodplain environment in the Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti, Gisborne, to really short, sharp, steep catchments, highly urbanised in Auckland. So hence the approach of taking a property by property risk assessment basis and the sometimes unintended consequences of a built environment creating greater risk.
For that. And then look, do we have any sense of how much money we could recoup in the long term from some of the properties that we are buying or remediating that might have development potential, or is it too soon to tell? Do you have any idea of that kind of scale? Because it's not all bad news here. There is opportunity to get something back.
It's not all bad news, Deputy Mayor. In the order of at least exceeding, we think we could back ourselves to cover through land optimisation, cover off the costs to cover the future resilience program within what was planned.
Thank you.
So we'll get that in February, probably. Richard.
Kia ora. Thank you, and I appreciate the work done on L, because I was freaking out with policy change in the middle of a process and trying to negotiate with government that was going to, yeah, thanks. My question just, and a little bit from Desley, just to get that straight. So the 700 was best estimates, right? We had done zero work, and it was open about that at the time because we couldn't do we did a helicopter view, but we couldn't do the deep dive at that time. Is that correct? And because that was government essentially rushing us before the election.
That's correct, Councillor Hills.
And then the other two, and then there's about, yes, there's a weird middle bit, but there's also the 2Cs, which also we chose partially because the government also wanted to move those forward. And that'll be, I assume, a big part of the sales back. So the 2Cs, we had to buy them, so they've popped into the Category 3, but a lot of that could be sold back after the resilience projects.
That's correct. So with a different development form on that land, or in some cases there may be some early wins where we can, on some properties, put some interventions in place that would allow earlier sales.
Yeah. And because of the 300 or 400, like we can't leave those, if we've identified them as risk to life, we just can't leave them or cut off a process halfway through. But you say the government would prefer the mix around, but this will, either option means we are putting in more. Are you saying your early conversations, and they're probably confidential conversations, I guess, are that the government looks like they wouldn't put extra in? Or do you think they're open to that?
I think their preference is to work within the existing funding envelope and shift money between Category 2 and Category 3. So no more new funding, but you do have the ability to request that under the agreement.
Yeah, I do. My preference, and I guess this isn't a question now, my preference would be, and I guess how are you going to cascade these kind of options with the government, would be go harder on extra, because what I'm hearing from government MPs and ministers is they want us to do the blue-green networks and buy out all the houses, but if they don't do the first one, we can't do both. Like we'll have a significant reduction in the resilience projects.
Hence the recommendation from staff that that's the first option we go to the Crown and the government with, Councillor Hills. So making that very point that the resilience program is critical for other reasons than the intolerable risk to life houses. There's other co-benefits around roading, around homes that would otherwise flood. So there are other benefits.
And is there a slightly easier way, and I'm thinking the breadth of information ministers get on top of what we get, I love a spreadsheet, but it is pretty hard to pick and choose what would be missing. Can you make it very clear if there is no additional funding from the government and/or they don't allow us to change those formulas of funding, it will mean X number of projects don't happen or whatever. Like, I think it needs to be a bit, I know you can't be public with those, but I think it would be important that they know there'll be a significant number of communities that may or may not. I know that Henderson and Wairoa are still up there, the most dangerous, but there may be some areas that will definitely not get a project.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. That is the clarity we have from the government and working with officials is that ministers are expecting that information so they can make decisions.
Yep, Chris.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I don't intend to speak later, so I just want to make a couple of comments and then I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, we're in an open meeting. The people who've been impacted by the floods are probably still, many of them, traumatised and listening in right now. In some ways, it strikes me that we're trying to make too many decisions today. The Mayor is quite right to make sure that there is contestability and a healthy tension as we move forward. But first question is, could we, before we have our meeting in February, have a workshop? Because I think for those listening in, it will be very hard to think, oh, it's the money or the bag in terms of blue-green networks or flood recovery and what's at risk and what's at stake for them. So would you entertain having a workshop so that we can wordsmith these things appropriately with the insight that we will have gained, hopefully, by that time from discussions with government?
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. We will be in a position in that time frame to provide more information. I'm getting an indication from the Chair that he would entertain a workshop for you.
Thank you. That is something I'd like us to give consideration to. And can you just remind me, we have so many working parties, who's on the working party again? So in terms of the delegations that we're giving for work to continue, can you just remind me, along with the CEO, who will be part of that process?
Certainly, Councillor Fletcher. So the Political Advisory Group for Storm Recovery is the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, the Chair, or Councillor Hills as Chair of his committee, and the Chair of this committee. The Chair of Hokura IMSB.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that be expanded to include the Chair of our Budget Committee as well, because this has budgetary implications, and it would be helpful perhaps for his insight on that. In addition to that, when you are looking, and I see that the wording seems to meet everyone's desire here, under L, to look for options for cost minimisation, revenue maximisation, he may be able to give insight into ways in which that could be achieved, how those properties might be handled in that time. So I'm just putting that up as a suggestion. So my last question really is to our director here. Is there anything that we are requiring today? Obviously the recommendations there, not all of them in a sequential sense are going to be able to, is there anything else that we can remove that can be best dealt with in February?
Just got to have a little hold because we've just lost our quorum with the Mayor and Josephine wandering out. So
I could ask our director informally, Barry. Well, we are adjourned until such time you have a quorum. So do we finish recording until such time as we have a quorum?
I don't know what the technicalities are in terms of recording, but at the moment we're just going to hold the meeting, just kind of pause the
Well,
meeting.
if we're adjourned, we won't have a recording.
Well, yeah, so automatically, and so
Joe's back.
Joe's back, so we're good to go. I think.
Okay.
So we've regained the quorum, so now we can continue with the meeting. Good story. Glad that it's working.
So my
Okay.
question is to Barry. Barry, I felt that while we need to give officers direction, and I have every confidence in Mace, and I think he inherited a slightly difficult situation from the former flood recovery manager, we need to give a sense of direction to our officers here. But are there some recommendations today that might be better dealt with in February, following a workshop?
Just going to say, I think when these were set up, they were set up on the basis that we would be able to give that they're not binding. They're not. It's not quite the right word, but they're set up on the principle that they would be enacted in February or changed in February once we have that information.
It's just the word endorse can perhaps confuse people.
That's, if I may, Chair, Councillor Fletcher, we are also attempting to give the Crown some assurance around the direction that we're taking here, so that we can work with them, but certainly reporting back in February. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you for indulging me, Chair. I'm happy to support these, but I really do strongly suggest that while there is uncertainty, we have to be mindful when we are discussing these matters in public that there are people who have been and continue to be severely traumatised by this, and I want to ensure that we don't further catastrophise the situation.
Yep, good point. Okay, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm kind of interested to understand the offset. So we've got these costs going out in terms of the money that we're able to retrieve in terms of us owning, because we end up owning the land and the buildings on it. So can you just give a sense of what offsets we're getting back in terms of, the selling of the land? So that's, because I don't know what the number is. I think that's what Kay's referring to. That's my first question.
So yes, that's what Kay's referring to, and as has been discussed and is now, I suppose, re-emphasised by Al, that the team are working on what opportunities exist with the land parcels that have already been purchased and will be purchased over the remainder of the program. And there is a view that there will be opportunities for, revenue realisation, and that going forward, we would look to recommend that that the council set targets for revenue, and that will be coming back in February to offset some of these additional costs.
So will that include there are people out there that will take a house away and sell it,
Any returns from those are already built into the net costs of deconstruction.
And I guess, do kind of like the Mayor said, it's the whoop moment, and you pull up. So is there any lateral thinking that we can do? I guess I just need to ask you this question in terms of council getting in our own way. Is there anything that we need to do politically to remove or make flexibility around our own rules or plans that may be getting in our way accidentally at the moment that we might not be aware of but would be very helpful for you?
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. We can lend our minds to that, but at present we have the tools at our disposal that we require. We are doing some work on what things could look like in the future to avoid these situations or to make them more efficient should we face these situations in the future, and we'll be reporting back to you. And also central government agencies are interested in that as well, so that we can have a more efficient way of dealing with these issues.
And Mason, did I hear you correctly saying that in terms of the current agreement, I know the government wants to work within their envelope, understand that, but we can request for more money. So are we? What?
Yes, that's in one of the resolutions. Councillor
is?
says
It is
the
covered?
first one.
Is it? Okay, that's good then. I'll support it.
And so
Okay.
Okay, any further questions? None, thank you, team. Thank you for that work and that advice. Is there any debate or commentary? Richard?
Just super quick, yeah, being on that, I don't think, hang on a second. Sorry, it was just really quick. I think, yeah, a bit dangerous to try and change policy halfway through. Really glad that we've got, a intermediary review phase, I guess, but it's really important we don't start reviewing people that have already been categorised. There's so much confusion out there at the moment, and I just think we do need to push back a little bit onto the government to see what they can do. Their balance sheet is far greater than ours, and the residents that need help are also their residents too. So this is a good start, but I would be worried that we give signals that we're going to be reviewing the policies. If you look back at them that we passed last year, are very clear about what we wanted to do, what we expected from people, and what we weren't able to do. If we go and try and review every retaining wall or review consents from 1984, the cost of this will go up another $1 billion. So we just need to be careful about reneging on what we approved a year or so ago. But I think this is good, but I do want the government to know if they don't help us, there will be a reduction in overall projects. Thanks.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks. I just want to acknowledge how difficult this is for a lot of people. We have people in intolerable risk to life situations, and we also have some very real constraints on our ability to fund this. And I think this is probably the best way forward. We just cannot end up in a situation where we have to not make offers to everybody with Category 3. That for me is just a bottom line. We can't partway through the process go, hey, sorry, but you applied later than others, so we're looking at you through a different criteria than we've looked at others. So we just have to keep going, I think. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Shane?
Yeah, just really quickly agree with everything that's said, and I'd add, and this kind of prefaces the conversation in February, that we can't be looking to delay things in terms of the Category 2 projects where we've made promises to communities. We need to fulfil those promises, so we should talk about that more in the new year. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any further comments? None. So we've seen now we have 12 parts to the resolution, and including the last one there. It's been moved and seconded. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? Carried. Thank you. Righty-ho. On sort of a related almost topic,